Welcome to the 6th episode in a Legendarium series about the rise and fall of the Carthaginians. In Part 6, Carthage Must Be Destroyed, we will talk about the Third Punic War, in which Rome, which was growing fearful of Carthage's recovery after the Second Punic War, decided to eliminate its great rival once and for all, and they did so in a brutal 3-year siege. Even after Hannibal's exile and death, Carthage continued its recovery from the Second Punic War. Indeed, it rebuilt its trade network, which now stretched as far northeast as the Balkans. Ironically, Carthage's most important trade partner became the Roman Republic. Carthage exported grain and barley to Rome, and even provided ships and men for Rome's campaigns in the eastern Mediterranean. However, as the 2nd century BC wore on, the Carthaginians grew increasingly resentful of their lost territory and independence. They especially worried about the steady expansion of their former junior partner Numidia, which had gained control of almost half of Carthage's African territory since the Second Punic War. However, the city of Carthage itself remained prosperous. Indeed, when Marcus Porcius Cato, better known as Cato the Elder, traveled to Carthage in 153 BC as part of a delegation to end the on-again, off-again war between Carthage and Rome's ally Numidia, he was shocked at their recovery. Cato became convinced that Rome must eliminate Carthage completely before it could again threaten Sicily and Italy. Whether he spoke about roads, trade, or taxes, Cato always ended his speech with Ceterum, Censeo, Carthaginem esse delendam. When translated into English, it means, "Furthermore, I say that Carthage must be destroyed." Cato the Elder ranked as one of the most popular men in Rome at the time, having served in the Roman army as a teenager during Hannibal's invasion over 60 years ago. In sharp contrast to his opulent colleagues, Cato worked in his fields alongside his slaves, dressed plainly, and passed laws against conspicuous consumption. With such an admired man backing the warhawks, they gained ground in the Roman Senate. And it is worth noting that Carthage had been using its new wealth to rearm. The treaties ending the Second Punic War had limited the Carthaginian fleet to 10 ships. However, in secret, they built a hidden military base concealed by walls and cliffs, with a tower so that lookouts could keep an eye out for Roman delegations. In 150 BC, the Carthaginians elected a brash young military leader named Hasdrubal to reverse their losses in Africa against the Numidians. The campaign proved to be a disaster for Carthage, but it gave Rome the excuse it needed to debate war against Carthage, because the peace treaty which ended the Second Punic War required Carthage to ask for Roman permission to wage any war, even if it was in self-defense. And during a Senate debate over war with Carthage, Cato the Elder opened up his toga and 3 figs tumbled out. He declared that he had purchased these figs from an over-prosperous Carthage, which might be at the gates once more. And then Carthage's longtime ally Utica, perhaps sensing that the wind blew against Carthage, defected to Rome. It provided a harbor for a Roman invasion just a day's sailing from Carthage. Cato the Elder lived just long enough to ensure that a member of the Scipio dynasty, which had defeated Hannibal over 60 years ago, joined the African invasion. The Romans made a final offer of peace, in which they demanded 300 children from noble families as hostages in exchange for not invading Carthage. When the Carthaginians refused, Rome sent an army of 80,000 infantry and 4,000 cavalry to North Africa. Upon arriving, the Romans offered Carthage one final opportunity for surrender. The Romans demanded that Carthage disband their army, hand over all their weapons, and then abandon their city to resettle no less than 10 miles from the coast. With little left to lose, the Carthaginians released their slaves from the city and recalled their army from Numidia to defend Carthage. When Hasdrubal took Roman prisoners during a brief skirmish, he put them up on the walls. Hasdrubal proceeded to remove their eyes, tongues, and genitals with iron hooks before he skinned them alive in front of their comrades in arms. Then Hasdrubal threw their bodies to the Romans below, his answer to Rome's ultimatum, and Hasdrubal had good reason to feel confident against the Roman invasion. Carthage had some of the strongest fortifications in the ancient world. It boasted over 20 miles of defensive walls, some of which had a triple defensive line, and other sections were protected by palisades, ditches, and even the sea. On top of that, the Romans failed to blockade the port, which meant the city could be resupplied. Even better, the Carthaginians sent out sorties to counterattack the Romans. These raids reached their climax with a wave of fire ships that set the Roman fleet ablaze. And in a final blow to Roman fortunes, a severe epidemic swept through the besiegers in 148 BC, leaving many soldiers dead or sickened. For a less determined army, this would have ended the invasion. However, in the next year, 147 BC, the Romans found a new commander in the youthful and energetic consul Publius Cornelius Scipio, a grandson of Scipio Africanus who had defeated Hannibal in Africa 60 years ago. Scipio the Younger built a siege wall around the harbor, including a structure which blocked access to the port. Fresh from this success, Scipio then systematically attacked the wall near the harbor, using his structure there as a base. Once more, the city became wholly cut off from its merchant fleet. By the winter of 147 and 146 BC, the citizens began to starve. The mills went silent, and the undertakers grew busy. The very old, very young, and the sick would be the first to die, and they did so in appalling numbers. People forgot the sacred burial rites and simply tossed corpses into ditches. However, the final blow came in the spring of 146 BC, when Scipio launched an all-out assault against Carthage. Before Scipio attacked, he spoke these chilling words to his troops: "All of you spread fear, flight, and terror in the city of Carthage." Once more, Scipio the Younger made the harbor the focus of his attack. Roman soldiers broke through the defenses and slowly advanced through the city. Carthage included 3 narrow main streets lined with 6-story houses. Whenever the Romans tried to advance, the Carthaginians on the rooftops rained stones, arrows, and rubble upon them. So Scipio put whole buildings to the torch to smoke out Carthaginians waiting in ambush or those simply trying to hide. Flames burned so hot that they turned stone walls red in some places and left scorch marks upon limestone buildings. Death squads went through the city, slaughtering men, women, and children, and then dragging charred corpses out of burned buildings to hurl into ditches. Roman horsemen trampled still living men in the streets until their faces became red pulp. Scipio, like any good death squad commander, made sure to rotate the men in his killing squads regularly, both to preserve their strength and their sanity. After 7 days of street fighting and murder, only the temple of Eshmun in the center of the city remained. Hasdrubal led 900 desperate men in the temple. For his brutal execution of Roman troops, Hasdrubal could expect no mercy. In a frantic effort to save his life, Hasdrubal ordered death to any Carthaginian who surrendered. The city elders defied him and begged Scipio for mercy. Scipio granted it in a fashion. Almost 50,000 old men, women, and children marched out of the city gates to waiting ships, which would transport them to the slave markets. This broke Hasdrubal's nerve. In a shocking act of cowardice, Hasdrubal surrendered to Scipio. In shame and outrage, his wife is said to have shouted to him from the rooftop as he begged Scipio for mercy. "Wretch! Traitor, O most effeminate of men, this fire will entomb me and my children. But what of you? What punishments will be inflicted upon you by the man at whose feet you are sitting? Whose triumph will you grace?" She then murdered her 2 children and threw them onto a massive funeral pyre. She then hurled herself onto the blaze. The few surviving Carthaginian soldiers followed her into the fire. Carthage, after almost 700 years of power, wealth, and glory, had fallen to Rome. Women and children were crammed into ships and taken to ports of call around the Mediterranean. As with many earlier generations of victims, their captors disrobed them and prodded them onto auction blocks for bidders to bid on and purchase. Fortunate slaves might become housemaids, craftsmen, or curiosities. Roman masters fed the unfortunate to the arena, mines, and brothels. 50,000 Carthaginians wound up slaves, and another 150,000 were murdered. Over the next year, Roman soldiers destroyed the Carthaginian council house, state library, and the temples. Roman commanders proclaimed a curse upon anyone who tried to resettle Carthage, though the story of them sowing the fields with salt was a myth invented by later generations. Today, this would be considered ethnic cleansing, if not genocide. Rome took over Carthage's empire, seizing control of the lead and silver exports from Spain, along with the rich trade in grain, olives, and grapes, the triad which made up the Mediterranean diet. However, the benefits of Rome's war did not go to the soldiers who laid siege to Carthage and joined Scipio's death squads. Rather, the benefits went to the aristocracy. Soldiers who served in foreign lands for years at a stretch returned to Italy to find their family farms seized by greedy patricians. They became part of a vast urban underclass, which depended on the bread dole and stayed entertained in the arena, forgetting their misfortunes by watching slaves fight. Some of those slaves were probably Carthaginians. Utica, Rome's vital ally in the war, became the new capital of the Roman province of North Africa. Scipio became known as Scipio Africanus the Younger, to set him apart from his grandfather, Scipio Africanus the Elder, the man who defeated Hannibal. Scipio the Younger received the honor of a triumph through the streets of Rome, and as for Carthage, it remained uninhabited until its refounding by Julius Caesar over 100 years later. While it rose again as a Roman city, later generations of writers portrayed the Carthaginians as cruel, perverse, and weak, and played up the stories of them sacrificing children. Of course, all of this was just propaganda, intended to make Rome's power grab made out of fear and greed into a moral crusade that it never was. And that wraps things up for this series in the Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you saw, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.